I would like to thank everyone for joining us again and for attending this panel. As I mentioned before, one of the key differentiating elements of this forum is that we have representatives from the major stakeholders across the industry to come together and debate critical issues about decarbonization. And I think one of the most critical issues has to do with policymaking, the regulatory decarbonization roadmap for shipping. I would like to thank John for moderating this panel. And we have a tremendous group of panelists. I will let John introduce them. So I would like to welcome you all and thank you for being with us today. Every panel of this forum is really top level, but I'm really looking forward to this one because I think this is such a key topic for the industry. So John, and thank you to all of you for joining us today, all the panelists.
Thank you, Nicholas, and good morning to everyone. I'm delighted to be here, and I thank Nicholas and all of his team for organizing, again, an outstanding symposium. And welcome to all of our panelists as well, and to all of you watching today. My name is John Keough. I am a senior partner in the firm Clyde & Co. I'm based in New York, and I am the co-head of the firm's North American practice for international shipping, marine, energy, and trade. Now, we do have a distinguished panel today. Let me just briefly introduce them. And we have a hot topic, a series of these hot topics to run through today. But with us, we have Sanne Henriksen, who is the Senior Regulatory Affairs Manager at AP Moller Maersk, Caroline Yang, who is the President of the Singapore Shipowners Association, Magda Kopczynska, the Director for Innovative and Sustainable Mobility at the European Commission Directorate General, the Directorate General for Mobility and Transport, Dimitrios Fafalios, who is the Chair of INTERCARGO and President Director of Fafalios Shipping. And also joining us, I think later on the panel, is Guy Platten, who is the Secretary General of the International Chamber of Shipping. And last but not least is Lasse Kristoffersen, who is the CEO of Torvald Klaveness. Panelists, all welcome. We will be addressing the regulatory aspects of the shipping industry in seeking a zero carbon approach to shipping. And with us first, let me turn to you, Sanne. At Maersk, what do you see as sort of your wish list? What would you most like to see if you could have a wish list with the regulators to transition into a green shipping economy?
Thank you, John, and good morning, good afternoon to everyone. Good evening, wherever you are. So I would say three main points of such a list. Well, first of all, of course, high ambitions leading to real reductions. So when we at Maersk in 2018 came with our ambition for carbon neutrality in 2050, it seemed like a moonshot. And the same did the IMO's target for 50% in 2050. And everyone can agree that that's no longer enough. So regulators really need to push high ambitions at the IMO, and they have a chance to do that at the revision in 2023, a revision of the IMO strategy. So and I would also say we were quite disappointed with the lack of ambition in the short-term measure that the IMO agreed on in November last year. So we really hope that this will be the year that the IMO will raise the bar. So that's related a little bit to my second point, which is future-proof regulation. So the development of fuels is really happening exponentially. So we need to go away from business as usual and focus on flexibility in the regulation that can encompass a wide varieties of fuels also in the future. And at the same time, it needs to ensure stability and certainty. And we also have to stop talking about just one fuel for shipping. We often hear in the public debate that this or that fuel does not have the necessary scalability, etc. And the reality is that it doesn't need to. It's clear now that there will be different fuels for different kinds of shipping and different kinds of vessels. Short-term shipping may use electricity and hydrogen, and deep sea shipping may use renewable methanol or ammonia. So it's really important that the regulators make good, solid framework that can encompass many types of fuels, and also in order to avoid stranded assets in the future. And then finally, the last third point is life cycle perspectives in the regulation. And it's very relevant today because just now the IMO is initiating their discussions on this topic, which is extremely important. And from their side, we really hope that and encourage the IMO to include life cycle perspectives in the regulation, so that the regulation takes into account also emission from production and distribution, and not only what comes out of the chimney. And this is of course important to ensure that the future fuels that are pushed actually bring down greenhouse gas emissions and does not emit elsewhere in the chain. So those would be my 3 points: high ambitions, future-proof regulation, and life cycle perspective. Thank you. Oh, you're muted, John. I think.
Sorry. Still on my first cup of coffee. I can't unmute. What do you believe should be done to accelerate the efforts in the industry and among regulators, the decarbonization efforts? Is there any particular step that you have in mind?
Yeah, well, I think acceleration is really a good choice of words here. It's really key, and especially we have to look at the solutions that we can act on now. And Maersk, we did that when we now in February presented our plans for the world's first carbon neutral liner vessel in 2023, which is going to sail on renewable methanol. And in that sense, we believe we sort of took the first step to break the chicken and egg situation. And now we really need regulators to support, to both kickstart the demand and not least the supply, because actually we don't even know if there's supply enough of renewable methanol in a few years. So we really rely on regulators on this one, that they not only push, but also stimulate faster development of these types of fuels. And in this context, we also really want to firmly say that the IMO needs to start the discussion on market-based measures, which we really hope will start this year, in order to close the competitiveness gap between fossil fuels and new fuels. So we need regulation that of course focuses on the GHG content or in the emissions, but we also need the financial support, like for instance, the current mechanisms in the EU, but there's also a proposal from the industry to the IMO for a $500 billion R&D fund, and we really hope that the IMO will consider this also this year. And then finally, a fundamental premise is of course customers' engagement and our good cooperation with customers like H&M, who use our carbon neutral eco delivery product, is of course the key in all this. Unfortunately, we see the demand increasing, but of course we need further increase for shipping to decarbonize. Yeah, so that would be my points there. Thanks.
Thank you, Sanne. Thank you, Caroline. You've heard that here's the platform Sanne has described as a representative of the Singapore Ship Owners Association. Can you tell us, are your ship owners aligned on what should be done, what steps should be taken, and what do you see as the key steps that should be taken so that regulators like the EU and the IMO hear your voice and acknowledge and include your ship owners in what's going on?
Okay. Thanks a lot. Thank you, Nicholas, and thank you, Capital Link, for having me on this panel session. So Singapore is actually an international maritime center, and our base of the owners or ship owners are diverse with MNCs and SMEs. And because of its the vibrancy of the ecosystem, our views are quite international in nature. But the Singapore Shipping Association is also part of the ASEAN Ship Owners Association and also the Asian Ship Owners Association. So these associations are active as well, and they also have strong views. So I am hopeful that in the wider IMO family, that since Asia does account for about at least 50% of the shipping tonnage, that we ensure that the Asian perspectives are taken into account when policies and regulations are met. So on Sanne's point of view, where we talk about acceleration at the IMO, I do agree that IMO must demonstrate that it is serious and it must take leadership and towards decarbonization. For the Asian perspective, it is important that we do not want to have individual states or groups of states unilaterally passing regulation that would upset the level playing field that is crucial for global shipping. So IMO must demonstrate that it's prepared to act. So the MEPC that's coming on in June is quite important because it needs to show that it's passing very robust evidence-based regulations for decarbonization. So we are also supporting the paper for the IMRB, a fund to collect a fund for the R&D for decarbonization. Thank you.
Thank you, Caroline. Is there any particular step that you would stress that your organization would like to see the IMO take to help accelerate their efforts?
Just to also echo Sanne, I think the package of the short-term operational and technical measures for existing ships, I think needs to be pushed and need to be more robust. So that's where we see as one area. And the other area, of course, is what I said about the IMRB. We feel that the R&D is critical, and if this IMRB promises to draw directly from the ship's contributions to support the development of technology that can be proven to reduce shipping's emissions.
Thanks, Caroline. Lasse, you've heard what our fellow panelists have said. Tell us your view on your perspective. Where is the shipping going in decarbonization? What's the realistic, practical view in your point, in your perspective on this?
Yeah, thank you, John. And for me, we need to start with two fundamental premises. One is that we need to be aligned with Paris. So to dull ourselves that we can get to 50% in 2050, forget it. I mean, we can believe as an industry we will, but then somebody and the next generation will come in 2030s and tell us, forget it. Whether you have a vessel which is 5-year-old in 2050, if it carries carbon, it will not be able to trade. I think this is just a reality. We cannot dull ourselves to say that we as an industry can define our own destiny unless we do something. And that window is now. And the good news is, of course, that we will change the whole world fleet within the next 30 years. So this is the window of opportunity to make sure that people are not locked into old technology. The second premise is that whatever happens, the market will not solve this itself, period. Hydrocarbon fuels are competitive, and if the market are to decide, carbon fuels will be still dominating. There's no way, even if future electricity is free, zero emission fuels will not be able to compete neck to neck with carbon-based fuels. So we need to intervene in the market. And obviously we all want that to happen in IMO, but when that doesn't happen in IMO, we should praise national countries like Norway and others, regions like EU, to push this agenda as long as they do it with the global solution in mind. In other words, we need to design these measures so that they are scalable into a global solution, but they can start national or regional. I think that's what needed to get going. And then
how do you fight the market resistance? How do you forestall the market resistance?
I think we need to do three things. Start with one and stop with two. One, we need to start discussing the real price on carbon. The intervention in the market, the way you get the shipping markets to regulate and find the solutions themselves, is to put a price on the stuff you don't want. And then there are two other things we need to stop doing. One is to say as an industry, we can't afford it. Shipping and ship owners have never carried the bill of fuel. That is eventually carried on to the end user of the product or the customer. And second is to say that we don't have the technology and solutions. That's not correct. We know for sure that the future fuel will be based on hydrogen. Whether it's added CO2 to methanol or nitrogen into ammonia or as a pure gas or liquid, that depends on the use, but we know that and we have the technology. So this is something we can solve. It's just a question of understanding the urgency of it and get it done. And in my view, to put that price on carbon and create the mechanisms that get us out of the chicken and the egg, where nobody invests in fuel infrastructure because we don't have ships, and nobody invests in zero emission ships because you don't have fuels.
Thank you. Thank you. Dimitrios, what do you tell us about your concerns with the regulators and industry group initiatives here? Are you concerned with a patchwork of regulations, but no overall uniform approach?
John, thank you very much. And again, much appreciation to Nikos, Olga, and all the team at Capital Link, and to my fellow panelists. Just to give you an example of this huge patchwork, I represent the dry bulk industry. We have more than 12,000 vessels in the industry, 900 million deadweight, with the 20% of shipping's emissions, but 50% of the global ton miles. And this industry has at least 400,000 seafarers in it, and we mustn't forget them. We're also very fortunate because of the structure of our sector that we have amongst the lowest carbon intensities of all the marine transport sectors, as was confirmed in the IMO fourth greenhouse study. But even though I've attempted to just give you a background on one particular sector, shipping is incredibly complex. We have to try to assist the regulators to understand the different sectors and the different economic models within this huge industry. Regulation must be effective, balanced, and not just fall on the ship owners automatically and by default. I think we've had Lasse saying before about the charterers, who are the economic operators, and they play a structural role in the bulk tramp industry, and they determine a ship's carbon footprint. They're the cargo interests, the fuel suppliers, the shipbuilders, and the engine makers. And the easy solution is not always the correct one, especially when dealing with an industry as complex and diverse as ours. And regulators should perhaps seek to reconcile environmental imperatives with existing business models, especially when the latter are as highly efficient as they are in the tramp bulk oil sector. So
how can they best do that? How can they best do that in a fragmented industry like shipping and the supply chain you described? Any key steps they should focus on?
I think that regulations, Sanne said that we're going away from a one-size-fits-all. So we're leaving an era where hydrocarbons have powered, especially the deep sea fleet. So we're leaving this era. It's probably like when the sails moved to steam. We are making this very, very big transition. Now, if you have all of these different fuels, alternative fuels, all of these alternative fuels have to match the demand for these alternative fuels by the individual sectors. So for instance, the liner sector will have a different set of demands. The bulk tramp sector will have a different set of demands, the cruise sector, et cetera, et cetera. So regulations could be better matched to the sectors by fully understanding the economic dynamics of each sector. So for instance, in a liner sector, you have to deliver on time. You have to, speed and consistency of service is very, very important. In the tramp bulk sector, efficiency is very important because usually the most efficient vessel gets the business. It's quite a different set of parameters which have to be addressed. So you know, we obviously want international regulations, and I think that's been echoed by the previous speakers. But we also have to deal with, let's say, more regional regulations. And maybe I can talk about that later on if you give me a chance.
That's
Thank
fine.
you.
I'd love to. I'd love to. Why don't we turn now to our key regulator here, Magda. You've heard the ship owners describe some of their concerns. I know you've taken quite an initiative at the European Commission to engage and collaborate with industry leaders in the work that you're doing. Could you describe, I think, first of all, just sort of where are we on the regulatory front? Where are we going next? And how can there be a uniform approach that avoids this patchwork concern that the industry has?
Thank you, John, and good afternoon to everybody, and thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to be on that panel. And the words of apology, if you hear a humming noise in the background, it's not a wind, I'm not unfortunately on the sea coast, it's the airco that switches on and off regardless of the outside temperature. Outside temperature being +6, I don't need airco, but it's working, sorry about that. There's absolutely nothing I can do. It's easier to sort out the problem of decarbonization of shipping globally than to sort out my air conditioning in the office. Again, apologies for that. But now to seriously go back to your question, John, and I also heard what you said to Dimitrios, that there will be probably another round about, you know, the various levels of regulatory approaches. But I'd like to say that what I have heard so far is actually extremely encouraging because the message I'm hearing from everybody on that panel is that decarbonization of shipping is at the center of everybody's agenda at this moment. And I think this is already a good indicator that what we have been trying or what we have been doing at the European Union level is already resonating in other fora. For us, and I'm looking now and I'm talking now about the regulatory approach to maritime transport, to shipping. For us, international cooperation, international dimension is a key for a global sector. I want to start with it, and I will probably say it also at the end of my intervention. This is the best way forward, and this is the way that allows for the most inclusive approach. But at the same time, European Commission takes very seriously our responsibility to deliver on the expectations of citizens in the EU, which have spoken very strongly in favor of solutions pushing for greening of economy, the support for the Green Deal approach, and so on and so forth. And if you look at the European Green Deal that was announced in more than a year ago, we look at it a bit as our national action plan to decarbonize international shipping, because this is also what IMO has called upon in the 2018 strategy. Europe has a very clear vision to be the first climate neutral continent by 2050. We've increased our level of ambition in terms of reduction of greenhouse gas emissions by at least 55% by 2030. And with all that, it clearly indicates that all sectors of economy have to contribute, shipping included. Having said that, we have also been very clear in the very same Green Deal communication that when we will be looking at measures to decarbonize shipping, including emission trading scheme, it will be done in coordination and in compatibility with an international framework. But what I would also like to point to things that have been said before is that the solution is not only about one measure. If you look at the IMO strategy, it looks at quite a basket of measures, if I may say so, that need to be developed in the short term and in a longer term. And it's looking at carbon pricing, it's looking at operational measures, it's looking at fuels, it's looking at technical measures. It's a bit the same approach that we have also had at the EU level to look at different angles, at vessels, at supply, at demand, at R&D, at financing, because it's not easy to come up just with one single instrument that will deal with a sector as complex and as diverse as shipping is. And I completely agree that we need to regulate differently. We have to learn a new approach to regulation, going away from the old times when we had, one type of fuel and things were relatively easy. We also need to acknowledge that there may be different levels of ambition in different parts of the world, and we need to come up with instruments that will allow to account for that, but that will not push the level of ambition downwards. Because if I think, where we see our role in the context of the IMO debate, we sort of see ourselves as the ones continuously trying to push the level of ambition higher. But an effective way to do that is to be part of the discussion. That's why I started by saying that for us, IMO level of regulation is extremely important. But that means that we will be using different means and measures to push that level of ambition higher, including coming up with regulatory solutions at the EU level that will then fit into whatever will be developed at the IMO level. I'll stop here for now. Thank you.
Does the EU regulation in its leadership approach depart from IMO, the IMO status of regulation, and does it? How do you achieve synchronicity across, or consistency across those regimes?
I think we actually have, because if I look at past discussions, even discussions concerning reduction of sulfur contents of marine fuels, the discussion started at IMO. It was then picked up by the EU. Then we went ahead with the regulatory framework, which was then echoed, which was then confirmed also at a global level by the IMO. So actually, it's synchronicity doesn't necessarily mean that everything happens at the same time, also because we have a different speed of regulating at national level, at regional level, at the IMO level. But for me, what is important is that ultimately we have a consistent and complementary setup which works for an international sector. European Commission has been very clear. We are going to propose inclusion of shipping in the emission trading scheme. We are going to come up with a proposal to push for the uptake of alternative fuels. That will be on the table this summer. That will then be discussed by European Parliament and European Union member states. But that doesn't prevent us from discussions on similar topics in the context of the IMO. Sanne referred to the meeting on alternative fuels and life cycle approach at the IMO. One of the speakers in that event is actually a colleague from my team, who will be talking about the document we presented to the IMO on life cycle approach, which we absolutely agree is super important. So one does not prevent the other. What is important is that there is complementarity, and that's what is done at the EU level fits the global picture. Thank you.
Thank you, Magda. Guy Platten, welcome from the International Chamber of Shipping. Guy, you've heard our combination of voices today. Tell us what your perspective is on this. Where is the International Chamber on this, and where do you want to land?
Thanks, John. Thanks to Capital Links and Nicholas for inviting me onto this panel. Really interesting comments from colleagues on this panel. And you can't but help but agree with all of them in some way. I think what, we represent a global industry, global ship owners. What I think industry is looking for now going forward is certainty, so we can make those investment decisions, and true leadership at the member state level. I think Magda mentioned the point about they want any system developed in the EU to be rolled out on a global basis or done in conjunction. That is so important. We mustn't get into a situation where we have different regulations in different parts of the world. And we also, because I think that's an abrogation of leadership, to be honest with you. We need to have a global solution, because actually just being able to cut emissions in Europe is not good enough. We need to cut emissions on a global basis if we're going to save lives. And it reminded a little bit of the Titanic, actually. So the Titanic, a major disaster hit the iceberg, many lives were lost. But it didn't fall to one country to say, well, we'll just improve the regulations for ship design there. There was a global getting together, a convention, the SOLAS convention, which then set out the scene for the whole world to make sure many, many lives are saved. So I would just plead with that. I think shipping has had a bad press in some ways. We've been seen as reactive and not on the front foot. I would disagree, but I understand that perception. I mean, we realise that market-based measures are going to be an essential tool going forward, but it has to be coupled also with the right research, the right investment into not just whether hydrogen can be used as a fuel, but the entire infrastructure that goes with it. So those market-based measures do actually do what they're designed to do, which is to drive behavioural change to a zero carbon future. I think we probably don't help ourselves a little bit with the IMO roadmap to cut emissions by 50% by 2050. Actually, once we've got those zero carbon technologies, we're going to get net zero. That's going to follow. That without a shadow of a doubt, that's going to come along very quickly, because there'll be too many commercial and business pressures to not let that happen. So maybe we need to start saying that actually we're committed to net zero going forward. But I agree with Caroline and others, the fund and Sanne, the fund proposals we put forward, that's not in competition with the market-based measure. That's as part of this whole suite of things we're going to have to put in place if we're going to achieve this goal which we've set ourselves. And I absolutely believe that we'll get. I think we also need to educate the wider society, that there's going to be a cost to all of this. And that I think Lasse said, the cost isn't necessarily borne by ship owners, it's borne by the supply chain. So we do need to have a bit of education, because surveys come out, society, they say they want a green future, but you don't always see that they're actually prepared to pay for that. So that's it. And the final thing I would say is, whilst in the developed world, we've got all these high ambitions, let's make sure we don't leave anyone behind in terms of the less developed world. And we're seeing it now in vaccines. The developed world is rolling out the vaccines. Their economies are going to get started much quicker than those in the developing world. So I would also plea again that the solution we're going forward is a global solution that really does tackle climate change. So I've meandered all over the place, John. So I hope that helps.
No, I think you've touched on some very key points. Caroline, from the ship owner's perspective, how do you see the EU regulatory approach? And Magda's comments, did you want to comment on that? And is there alignment? Is there disagreement? Is there a potential for agreement?
Okay, wow, loaded question. So for the shipping industry in Singapore, we are not aligned with the EU ETS, the market-based measures that they want to impose on the shipping, primarily because we want to ensure that whatever taxes or whatever monies that the shipping has paid into any fund, it goes back to the research and development for the shipping industry, for the maritime industry. And with the EU ETS, I'm not sure that is going to happen for the maritime industry. So I think for us, we feel that the IMO is a supranational body. It is one that overarches the whole, all the member states, 160 plus of us. So we, as a small state, but playing a global role in the Maritime Center, we would really look towards the the IMO as the body that comes up with the solutions and the regulatory policies. Thanks.
Thank you, Caroline. Sanne, did you want to weigh in here on that point? How aligned are ship owners?
Yeah, well, yeah, I can speak for our part, of course, of the ship owners. But I would say I agree with those. Of course, I believe everyone has said that we need global regulation, and that's the default. Of course, we operate in the entire world, and it simply doesn't make sense to have a patchwork of, for instance, emission trading systems that are even overlapping because they cover voyages that goes outside of the territory. So that would be that is really too complex to handle. At the same time, I would also agree with Magda that there are member states that need to push in the IMO, of course, and we have seen the EU done that. As Magda mentioned on the sulfur regulation, I don't think we would have had the IMO 2020 if it hadn't been for the EU, who said, well, we'll just introduce our own requirements if you don't. And it's the same actually with the data collection system, where the EU also came with their MRV, which actually has some elements that the data collection system in the IMO does not have. So in that sense, we really hope that the EU countries will also push some of those elements at the IMO. So it is necessary that there are member states that push in the IMO. It remains to be seen whether the IMO can accelerate those discussions. We want the IMO to solve the problem, but it remains to be seen whether they can do that. And we hope that the IMO this year, 2021, and the important meetings this year will show that they can do that. So that's really encouraging all IMO member states to accelerate there. Yeah.
Lasse, how realistic is this? What are the concrete problems that you see in these steps?
Well, yeah, I wanted to jump in on a couple of points, and let's start with that. And the problem I don't see is the cost to society of decarbonizing. That's negligible. And just to give you a specific example, and we could have our combination carriers carried by ammonia, absolute emission-free wheat from South America to Europe, and that would increase the price of bread in Europe with less than 0.5 cent. And these examples are plentiful. This is not a question of society cost. And just to give another way to that, we have had fuel prices of $750 per ton of fuel. Most likely, we will, be able at scale to get down to about $1,000 per ton of fuel with the same energy equivalence on ammonia. That has not put any business, any country, nothing out of business. So we're taking this implication issue, I think, out of context. Looking at history, we have had very high energy prices. Quick comment to Magda on we need a lot of regulations. I agree. And energy efficiency, we need to really make sure we don't emit more than we need in the short term. But I'm not too much concerned because there's so much focus on it. The problem is that we are at the edge of what the current technology and fuel base can deliver. Maybe we have another 10-20% to go, but that's it. On speed, we have taken most of it. And that's what we have. So that's why I'm so concerned about the energy transition. How do we get to a new system? And how do we make sure that ship owners in the second half of this decade do not invest in assets which are locked into the last generation's infrastructure? And that's why I so much believe that we need to put in a tax. And the tax have two targets. One is to close the competitiveness gap, but as much to fund the transition. So when Guy and others are talking about this first level of fund on R&D, I agree to the fund as long as it's used to pilots, not to develop technology, but to deliver and pilot technology. The technology is there. The Virtualized demands and the Ørsteds of the world, they are investing billions into technology, but somebody needs to acquire it. And then, sorry for a long intervention, but I need one last point, and that is, so we all talk about global regulations and we agree to that, but that's not the question. The question is, how do we make that happen? And it won't happen by itself because an IMO is not a business, it's 170 countries with different agendas. So in a way, you need let's say as for security regulation in the world, we had a 9/11 moment, where in 9 months, all the ports of the world were basically fenced in and we had security regulations on the vessels. One of the reasons why I'm so supportive to EU's initiative is that we, on carbon, need a change moment. I think EU, by putting into their carbon tax also the inbound and maybe even outbound into EU, will be that moment where those countries in IMO realize it's not a question of whether we will tax CO2 on deep sea shipping. It's a question of who will do it and how we'll do it, and that will change the dynamics.
Thank you, Lasse. Magda, would you like to reply, please? I see that hand up, and I think you might have a few comments. You're at the cutting edge of what's happening. Go ahead.
Oh, you know, I'm not hearing very often that the European Commission is at cutting edge, so I'm gonna write down that, print it and put it on my wall for bad days. No, but seriously, but first of all, it's really interesting for me to listen to the comments from everybody, because these are all the thoughts and perspectives that I like to think we know of and we take account of, but it's never enough to hear them. And I would like to maybe say two things or three things. One, I didn't say it in the opening. This question of how we come up with future-proofed regulation. It is obviously the biggest challenge. I said we need to regulate differently. But for example, with the piece of legislation we are finalizing on alternative fuels, what we really want to achieve is to provide the sector with a perspective all the way to 2050, so that they know what they will be expected to deliver in terms of alternative fuels with reduced GHG content. And we're going to put numbers on what this reduction will need to look like every 5 years until 2050 to make sure that everybody knows what's needed. And second, to be very clear, towards 2050, it will not work with drop-in blends. It will not work with 10-15% incremental exchange by using a little bit of biofuels. We also, of course, it's a rather complex approach, and I'm not going to go into details because we also want to make sure that there are safeguards that it will actually work for the sector, and that there's a possibility to catch up at different pace. When you see the proposal, I'm happy to have a detailed discussion on the contents. But the idea for the proposal is also to very, very clearly award those who go zero emission earlier, because we know that we need zero emission or nearly zero emission ships on the water as quickly as possible, also because of the testing. We need to see how it works. We need to, in a way, the first ships, like the 2023 methanol fueled container vessel from Maersk, it will actually be a real life test case, how the technology is working and what's needed to make it function, and what's needed in terms of fueling infrastructure, for example, how much of that fueling infrastructure will be needed and where. And we are working also on a proposal on the supply of alternative fuel infrastructure in ports in the EU, but that's a side topic. And the second comment I wanted to make is again this thing between EU and IMO regulation. Just to recall, we put the legislative proposals on the table this summer. Then they will be negotiated by the two co-legislators, member states and European Parliament. This is a process that takes time, and it varies between proposals. It can take 6 months, but it can take 16 months, or it can take 3 years. Then there is still some time before they kick in and before they enter into force. We will be very much hoping that in parallel to that process, IMO will be coming up with a regulatory framework for a market-based measure in parallel. And we will then be able to make sure that those two are complementary. I don't believe that we really risk double counting with the current, technological solutions, with with systems that work and track and put information together. We will be able to have a system that will work at EU level and will be complemented at the global level. I'm also not overtly worried yet about a patchwork of solutions globally, because frankly speaking, and maybe that's not good, but I haven't heard about many other regions coming up with a market-based measure or a specific measure to push for uptake of alternative fuels in shipping yet. If it happens, then we'll see how we adjust. But I'm really, we have done it. We have done it in the past. We have found ways of being complementary and in sync with what's happening at the international level. Because on top of everything, we also transpose international IMO regulation into EU framework to make sure that enforcement and compliance is strengthened, and that there is a properly functioning level playing field for all ships calling into EU ports. And just a final comment, this question of level playing field and of flag neutrality is something that we will definitely have embedded in the proposals that we will be coming up with. Sorry about being too long.
Thanks. No, thanks, Magda. Dimitrios, does that comfort you? You've heard Magda's remarks, and what does the ship owner, what does the supply chain in the industry, how do they comply? What's the next step?
Well, with Magda, we've discussed several times, and there's lots of things that we agree on, and there are a few things that we don't agree on. I think if we just quickly go back to the EU ETS, I think Caroline also alluded to this. For our particular tramp bulk oil sector, it's a difficult system and really quite incompatible with our industry. But we do realize that there is a political impetus behind this. And what I talked about earlier is that the easy solution is not always the right one. And there have been initiatives, and in fact, there's one on the table now, which has been tabled by the Swedish Ship Owners Association, the Greek Ship Owners Association, and an environmental NGO, T&D, Transport and Environment. And I won't go into the fine details, but we're trying to find a way where a big sector of the shipping industry can comply with ETS in a practical manner. We're talking about, instead of buying ETS directly, we're talking about creating a fund which will buy the ETS, the polluter pays principle for the commercial operator, no free allowances, and the geographical scope of the system would be quite broad. And the joint initiative demonstrates that it is possible to be ambitious without disrupting a well-functioning industry. We talk about alternative fuels, completely agree. Our company is very definitely an SME, 5 vessels. This January, we tried to stem biofuel in Rotterdam. It was unbelievably difficult. There were so many obstacles put in our way that it simply became impossible. So here is a small company wanting to make a step, not in 2023, wanting to make a step in January 2021. And the regulation was not there. That's the simple fact. We tried to stem 600 tons of biofuel in Rotterdam in January, and you will not believe the hoops and hurdles that we had to jump over and jump through and things like that. So we have to make it easier. Yes, perhaps biofuel is not the overall solution. It's not, it perhaps won't be, but it's a step in that direction. And if we cannot create regulations which allow these steps, then I think that we need to go back and look very, very carefully. And another passion of Magda and mine as well is this clean shore power, which I completely support. But we have to also understand that the shore power has to be cleaner than the power produced on board. It has to be safe, and it has to be competitively available. So I'm very much for starting the transition now, not in 2023, but the regulations have got to assist us in this respect. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Dimitrios. We have about 10 minutes left. We have a handful of questions I'd like to quickly try to address if we could. Sean McLaughlin says, to Lasse, absolutely agree with your comments about a need for more ambition. How can we get the IMO to recognize that when the time of arrival is important, the slowest ship in the fleet will be increasingly irrelevant? They need to step up in ambition and pace of change, exclamation point. Any comments, Lasse?
No, I not sure if I got the gist of the question, but I think the issue is around the challenge of prescriptive regulation on vessels, speed and performance. Because you get so many secondary effects by doing this and the other that you don't really see when you sit, and have a desktop regulatory development. And that's why I so much favor to have the market solving the decarbonization issue by putting that price on the carbon. And even in the short term, I mean, if we put a price on carbon short term, that the one thing that would put down the speed the most, or would make it most economic to use low carbon vessel, would be the fact that it costs more to have a high carbon vessel. So I think in this, it just shows that it's really hard to be good on EEXIs and EEDIs and CII should EEOI or AER. I mean, all these things are really difficult, and I fully appreciate that. So, but we have to do both. We have to get easy regulations for blending in biofuels. We need to make sure the vessels don't emit more than they need in the short term, and we need to get going now in the transition.
Thank you. Kevin Allwright asks, and this goes to the funding concerns that have been mentioned. Wind propulsion can deliver up to 1/3 of the energy component required for shipping, he says. So these funds are required for installations now too. How can we ensure that funding and decarbonization pathways are equitable and realistic within the decade? Anyone want to handle that?
Well, I suppose in terms of all these sort of things, that's why we proposed an industry fund to help in this process, really. So it's everyone's paying into it, and that can be used for all these sort of projects as well. So I think that's the solution. And then couple it with market-based measures, putting a price on carbon, all these other things we've talked about, all has to go in parallel, in my view.
Thank you. And Jeffrey Swain asked, this follows on Dimitrios's comments, I think, in tandem. Has anyone looked at the carbon and environmental footprint of biofuels? Anyone want to handle that? Dimitrios, go ahead.
Yeah, it's a very relevant question because, in fact, the carbon factor of biofuels has not yet been fully developed at IMO, and needs to be developed at IMO because one of the issues is that when one is declaring either the European MRV or the IMO DCS, the data collection system, we need to have a carbon factor for the biofuels. Now, the biofuels, and I'm talking always about sustainable biofuels. I'm not talking about biofuels where we're taking crops and using them as fuel. And the marine industry's biofuels are quite different to the biofuels which are suitable for other industries. But it is a relevant concern to get the carbon, an accurate carbon factor for these fuels, because they will be one of the steps, not the only step, they will be one of the steps that's necessary to reach our long-term goals. Thank you.
Thanks. We're winding down here. We've got, let's see, we've got another question. How can we ensure carbon tax goes to funding the low carbon ship capital or loans as green funds? Anyone have a view on that?
I think if I may, John, I think that's a tricky question for any funding or for any funding / financing mechanism at any level. And I'm speaking for discussions we are having at the European Commission with EU member states, and I'm sure the same discussion will happen in the IMO, namely who gets who controls the money that will be gathered or will result from a market-based measure. I think it requires pressure from the industry, from stakeholders, and it requires a lot of discussions. But just let's not deceive ourselves here. It's not a straightforward question. The finance ministers in each country worldwide are very interested in any possible source of income, and I leave it at that.
Thank you. I think we're nearly out of time. Nicholas, are we out of time now, or do we have time for final comments?
We are a minute actually past the time. So
okay, well then let me just thank the panel, all of you for your fine contributions. It's been a pleasure seeing everybody today. And again, Nicholas and Capital Link, thank you, and thank you all for watching. Have a great
thank you to all of you.
Thank you.
Thank you
very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good